Hi everyone, this is Rosie, and today we're going to be sewing the Omnia pouch by Rosie and David Patterns. So let's get started. First, let's take a quick look at the pouch. It's approximately 10 inches wide by 6 inches high by 3 inches deep. It has this nice bound zipper that secures down with a cam snap on each side. If you want to pick it up, you can very easily pick it up by either side of the zipper and carry it. When you open it up, you'll see that it has a nice roomy interior with a wide opening. And if you release the snaps on the side of the bag, it opens quite wide. So let's go see what's needed to make the pouch. To make the pouch, you'll have to download the instruction sheet that I've prepared for you. It has the pattern piece on it for the side panel. It also has the template for your zipper tab. In addition, you'll find all of your cutting measurements listed for each individual fabric. You'll want to pay attention to the 2-inch test square. When you print this out, you'll want to make sure that your printer is set to 100%. And you're going to measure the test square from side to side and from top to bottom. And I will put a link in the description below the video to where you can find this pattern, and it is a free pattern. I've used 100% cotton quilting fabric for the entire project. And you'll need to get yourself a set of 2 full cam snaps. If you don't want to use cam snaps, you can use a different snap of your choice. And then you'll need to have a piece of vinyl. This is just some sparkle vinyl. You can see it's very flexible. And you need to cut out this piece of vinyl 4 inches by 4 inches, and that's what we'll use for our zipper tabs. Then you'll need to cut out 2 pieces of fabric for your zipper binding. Now this is just cut on the straight of grain. You don't want this to be cut on the bias. And this piece needs to be 2 inches high by 17 inches wide, and you will cut 2 of them. Then you need to cut out another 2 pieces of contrast fabric, and this will be for the binding on the sides of the bag. And you do want this one to be cut out on the bias, and you need to cut out 2 of them that are 2 1/4 inches high by 20 inches wide. For the interior sides, you want to cut out 2 pieces of fabric that are 10 inches high by 5 inches wide. And for the exterior sides, you want to cut out 2 pieces of fabric that are 7 inches high by 5 inches wide. For the exterior body, you need to cut out a piece of fabric that's 10 inches wide by 18 inches high. And then you'll also need another piece for your interior body that's also cut 10 inches wide by 18 inches high. Then from the Pellon Flex Foam, you'll cut out a piece that's 6.5 inches high by 10 inches wide, and we'll be using this for the sides of the pouch. And then for the main body of the pouch, you'll need to cut out a piece of Pellon Flex Foam that's 10 inches wide by 17 inches high. Then you'll need a zipper that's about 18 inches in length. We will be cutting it to size a little bit. I have 2 different zippers here. One is a number 4.5 zipper, and this one is a number 5 zipper. Both of these zippers have a zipper tape that's 1.25 inches wide. But the difference between the number 4.5 and the number 5 is the width of the zipper teeth. And you can use either one of these zippers. I have here some other items that you might like to have on hand. Right here I have 2 different kinds of fabric glue. This is optional. Also some double-sided stick tape, which is also optional. You'll want to have some fray check for when you put in your snaps. I will be using Wonder Clips, or you can use straight pins. For my thread, I'm going to be using a general all-purpose thread. This is Aurifil. You'll need to have a pair of scissors and a rotary cutter with a cutting mat and a rotary cutting ruler. Then you'll need to have something to mark with. Right here I have a friction pen. If you opt to use a friction pen, make sure you're careful where you put these marks, because while they will disappear with heat, they can come back with cold. I like to use a chalk marker, but I usually use the friction pen on camera because it's much easier for you to see the marks. But a chalk wheel works really great, and it's actually one of my favorite notions. You'll want to have a seam ripper, and then I have here a setter for setting in my cam snaps, and then I also have an awl here that I will use to poke the holes for setting in my cam snaps. The The first step is to take the Pellon Flex Foam that you cut out to be 6.5 inches high by 10 inches wide, and we want to trace the side panel onto that foam. I've already traced one here, and now we'll go ahead and trace the second one. Once you're done tracing the two sides, just go ahead and cut them out. After cutting them out, you want to go ahead and run a zigzag stitch all the way around the edges of each of these pieces. You also want to do that on the foam that you cut out for the body. That's the piece that you cut out that's 17 inches high by 10 inches wide. The reason why we're doing the zigzag all around is because it's going to compress the edges of these pieces, and that's going to eliminate bulk as you sew everything together. Now, to do this, you can use a sewing machine that has a zigzag stitch, or you can use a serger. If you don't have either one of those options, what you can do is just run 2 lines of straight stitching within the 1/4 inch seam allowance, and that will also help compress the foam to reduce the bulk. I'm sewing on a Juki Kokochi 4000 QVP. I will be using a triple zigzag stitch. You don't need to use a triple zigzag stitch, but it's what I prefer. You can go ahead and use a regular zigzag stitch. I'm going to be using a stitch width of 5.0 and a stitch length of 1.4. And you just want to have that stitch go right up to the edge. Then when you're getting ready to pivot, you want the needle to be on the left side. Then you can just simply turn and continue. Now that has flattened down the edges very nicely. You want to just go ahead and do the same thing to the second side panel, and you also want to do this to the piece that you cut out for the body of the bag. So I finished zigzagging around all of my foam pieces, the body and the two sides. And now you want to take the 2 pieces of fabric that you cut out for your body, both the interior and the exterior pieces, and you're going to place them right sides together. Make sure that you line up all of the edges. Make sure everything is nice and even. Then we want to sew the interior and the exterior body pieces together along the short edges. And we'll do that with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And what I like to do is take a ruler, and then I just measure in 1/2 inch from each edge, and I draw a line. And this line will be my stitching line. Now you don't have to do that, that's totally optional. But I like to do it, and on a small project like this, it takes no time at all to put those marks on. Go ahead and stitch those 2 seams. I will be using a stitch length of 2.4, and I'm just using a straight stitch. You do want to back stitch at both ends. And once you finish that first seam, go ahead and sew the second seam in exactly the same way. After sewing the seams, you just want to go ahead and iron them open flat. And you will do this to both seams. Now you want to take this piece here, and you're going to put the wrong sides together. And we're going to take the piece of foam that we cut out for the body of the pouch, which I have right here, and that's going to get slipped in between the interior and the exterior pieces. You want to make sure that the top edge of that foam is sitting right in the seam line here of the interior and the exterior pieces. So go ahead and get that all situated inside there. And you just want to make sure that everything is sitting in there nice and flat. Now I have that foam seated in between both the interior and the exterior pieces. All of the edges are even, so the edges of the fabric are even with the edge of the foam on both sides. And the top edge of that foam is sitting right where that seam line is on both ends. I'm going to mark some quilting lines now. I'm just going to be using some straight lines, but you can quilt this however you desire. If you choose to do a free motion, that's fine. If you choose to do lines, that's fine too. I'm going to mark my first line 5 inches in from the edge, and I am using that friction pen. I don't recommend that you do this. I'm only doing it so that you can see it easily on the camera. And then I'm going to go ahead and mark lines 1 inch away from each line. So basically my lines are just 1 inch apart from each other. And I'll do this until I get out to the edge on both sides. If you prefer to mark just one line and then use a quilting bar guide, that's fine too. I always like to mark mine. In addition to marking the quilting lines, I also want to mark lines parallel to the short edges. That's 1 inch away from each edge. Then the last thing that I do is place some clips along the long side edges just to hold everything together, and then we'll be ready to go ahead and quilt this piece. I will be sewing my quilting lines with a stitch length of 3.4. This machine has a built-in dual feed, which I'm going to engage right now. It works the same way that the dual feed feet work on most domestic machines. Now when you're quilting, you want to start with the middle line, and then you'll work your way out on each side. And you always want to start at the same spot. So if I'm starting on this end, on this short end, I will always start on this short end. And you do want to backstitch at both ends. And now that I finished quilting that first line, I'll move right back up to the top again. And you just want to keep sewing the same way until you have all of your lines quilted. Once you're done quilting all of the vertical lines, you're going to go ahead and turn the piece this way, and we just want to quilt along the top, along that line that we drew in that's parallel to the short edges. And you do want to backstitch at both ends. Then you'll go ahead and do the same thing on the other end. Then the last thing I'll do is just go ahead and baste 1/8 of an inch away from each long edge. And then you can finish up by basting the other long edge. Our body's done for now, so we can set that aside. And now we'll work on the sides. You'll need the pieces that you cut out for your exterior, your interior, and your 2 foam pieces. And the first thing that you'll want to do is take the pattern piece and trace it around the pieces that you cut for your exterior. And when you're done tracing, you'll just go ahead and cut out those 2 pieces for your sides. Once those pieces are cut out, you'll take the 2 pieces of foam and you want to put one of the fabric sides on each piece of the foam. Make sure that all of those edges are nice and even. And then at the sewing machine, you want to go ahead and baste 1/8 of an inch away from these edges all the way around the sides. And I'm going to go do that off camera. After you have that all basted together, you're going to take the piece that you cut for the interior side. And you want to place this short edge right here along this edge on the side. And then you're going to clip it in place. And you want to sew right across this edge here. You want to sew about 3/8 to a 1/2 inch away from the top. I have the other side right here, and I've already gone ahead and stitched across the top of the side off camera. Once you have it stitched down in place, you'll take the interior and push it up, and then you're going to fold it back over the top of the side there. So now we've created this faux binding. And what you'll do next is go ahead and trim off all of that excess interior fabric. I finished trimming down that interior fabric, so now it's the same shape as the side. And the next thing that we want to do is mark some quilting lines. So once again, I'm going to mark a line that's right about down the center there. And then I'll just mark 2 more lines 1 inch away from each side of that middle line right there. You can put some clips in to hold the layers together. And then when we go over to the sewing machine, what we want to do is stitch in the ditch right here along this faux binding, and then we'll stitch down each one of these quilting lines. So you want to prepare both pieces just like this. I'm going to start by stitching in the ditch along that faux binding, and I'll use a stitch length of 3.4 and do back stitch at each end. And then I'm just going to quilt down on these lines, and you want to do the same thing that you did before. You'll always start at the same spot. So if I'm starting at the top near the binding, I'll start each line at the top near the binding, and you do want to backstitch a few stitches here. Then you'll go ahead and quilt down the other lines. And then it's a good idea to just go ahead and baste all those layers together. You want to stay about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. And once you're done, you go ahead and do the same exact thing to the other side piece. Now that we're done preparing the sides, we're ready to sew the sides into the body of the pouch. The first thing that you need to do is find the centers of the bottom sides. And you can do that just by simply folding the side in half. And for me, my side mark is where the stitching line is. If your side mark is not near your stitching line, then you can just mark the center with your marking tool. Then after you have both of the sides measured for the center, you'll take the body of the bag, you'll fold it in half, making sure that your top edges are even, and then you can mark the center here with your marking tool. So I've already gone ahead and marked mine. I have my mark right here. And I've already marked both sides. If you prefer, you can make a small clip in to mark your center. Now if you do decide to use your scissors to make a little clip mark, make sure that you stay inside the seam allowance, which is going to be 1/4 of an inch. But I think it's preferable to use a marking tool rather than a clip. Now take the body of the pouch and open it up. You want to take your center mark on your side and line that up with the center mark on the body of the pouch. And I like to put a clip into both sides here. And then we're going to start clipping this along the length here. The top of your binding should land right about where that stitching line is. So I'm going to line the top of this side here with that stitching line and put in a clip. And then you just want to clip all down the side. When you come to the point where you're near this curve, you just want to bend everything around your fingers just like this. And then you'll put in a clip. And by rounding that around your fingers, you're easing that curve into the side of the pouch. And if you need to make a few adjustments, you go ahead and make a few adjustments. But this is exactly how you want it to look. Then you can go ahead and do the other side. So I'm going to take the top edge of that side and line it up with my stitching line here. And I'll put in a clip. And then we'll start clipping down the side. And again, when you get to where that curve is, you're just going to bend everything around your finger and ease that curve into the body of the pouch. I'll just make a little bit of an adjustment right here. And once everything looks good to you, it looks like it's all fitting in there properly, then you're going to go ahead and sew this all the way around from this gusset side 1/4 of an inch away from the edge, and we will do that on camera. I'm ready to sew in the side. I'm using a stitch length of 3.0 and my seam allowance is 1/4 of an inch. I did go ahead and put in my 1/4 inch foot here. I'm also going to use my seam ripper just to help me hold everything in place as I sew along. You do want to back stitch. And you really just want to go slowly here. Now as I get down towards the curve, I'm just going to push everything under, and I want to try and keep the piece as flat as I possibly can. I'm holding it with my fingers here. I'm going to take out this clip, and I'm also going to use the seam ripper to help hold everything down. Just want to make sure that you don't run over your seam ripper. And the key is just to take your time and go slow. I'm going to push again. That flattens everything out. And I just ran out of bobbin thread. Okay, I have rewound a bobbin and I'm going to continue on. You can see how I keep flattening everything down as I remove the clips. That really does help to hold everything together and keep everything exactly where it should be. And then backstitch when you get to the top. After the side is sewn into place, just go ahead and make sure that you caught all the edges in the seam. I also like to check inside to make sure that I've caught all of my edges. Now, once you're done, you can go ahead and clip in the second side exactly the same way, and then you'll go ahead and sew that in exactly the same way. I have that second side clipped into place, and one thing that I do like to check when I'm clipping in both sides is to make sure that the amount that's extending above the top side is the same on both sides. And now we can go ahead and sew in this second side piece. Now we'll go ahead and sew in the second side. The sides are in, so now we're ready to prepare our bias binding. So you want to take the strips that you have for your bias binding, and you're going to fold them in half with the raw edges together and press into place. Make sure that you keep those edges nice and even with each other. And you'll do this to both strips. After they're both ironed in half, you want to take one end and fold it under just about maybe 1/2 of an inch. And then fold it back again in half. And then you'll take the pouch and you want to start clipping this binding to the outside of the pouch so that the edge of the binding is lining right up with the edge of the side there, and you'll start clipping everything in place. You're going to clip all along the side. And this binding, because we've cut it on the bias, should fit very nicely around the curves. Then when you get right here to the top of the other side, you're just going to trim off some of that excess binding. You want to leave yourself about 1/2 of an inch, and then you're going to turn that under just the way you did the other side. So turn it under, fold it back in half, and then clip it. Just want to make sure that the top of the binding is even with the top of the pouch here. And then we're going to sew this down. We'll sew it from this side right here, 1/4 of an inch away from the edge, and you can follow your previous line of stitching if you wish. I'm going to sew down that binding with a stitch length of 3.0. The seam allowance is 1/4 of an inch, and you can follow along your previous line of stitching. You want to start right here at the top, and you are going to backstitch. You also want to make sure that you have clipped the raw edge of your binding to the sides. You don't want to sew the folded edge to the sides by mistake. So I'm just going to go ahead and backstitch. And sewing this in is a lot easier than when you sewed in the sides. When you get towards the bottom, you're going to tuck just like you did before, and you're going to go slow. We want to take the binding now, and we're going to roll it towards the side of the pouch. So this is my folded edge right here. You want that folded edge to be going slightly over your line of stitching. And I'm going to hold it in place with a few clips. My preferred method to finish off the binding is to sew it down by hand. If you decide to sew this by machine, what I would do is stitch in the ditch from this side, but you have to make sure that you're catching the binding as you're sewing it down on this side. And this really is personal preference. I'm never happy with the result that I get when I stitch it by machine, so I always stitch mine by hand. So you just want to ease that binding in around the curves, clip everything in place, get it to lay nice and neatly. And then you can go ahead and sew it down with your preferred method. And I'm going to go ahead and stitch my binding in by hand off camera, and then I'll go ahead and sew in the binding on the other side. Here's my bias binding on the side, all hand sewn into place, and this is what the pouch should look like now. And now we can go ahead and get started on preparing the zipper. First, we'll cut out our zipper tab. So you'll need the piece of vinyl that you've prepared for the project and the template for the zipper tab. You want to trace that template onto the back of the vinyl. Now, I've already traced 3 of them, so I'll trace 1 more. And then once you're done tracing these, you're going to cut them out right on the line. My 4 zipper tabs are cut out, and I'm going to set those aside right now. And you want to grab the pieces that you cut out for your zipper binding. We'll start out with one of them. We're going to fold it in half lengthwise with the wrong sides together. You want to match up these raw edges and give it a nice pressing. Try and keep those edges as even as you possibly can. Now remember, this piece was not cut on the bias. This was just on the straight of grain. Once you have that all pressed into place, you're going to open it up, and you want to take each long raw edge and fold it so that it meets that crease in the middle. And then you're going to press again. You want to try and be accurate with this. If it helps you to draw a line down the center of the piece of fabric, that's fine too. You can do that also. So I'm just butting that raw edge right up to the crease in the fabric. Then I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to do the same thing. So now I will have these two long edges meeting each other right where that crease is. And then just go ahead and press everything in place. And once you have those two raw edges meeting in the middle, you're going to take the entire piece and fold it completely in half so that those two folded edges now are meeting each other. And then just press all along the length. And then you'll do the same exact thing to the other zipper binding. I have my zipper bindings prepared. You do want to make sure that those two folded edges are even right at the top there. Now I'm going to be using a number 4.5 zipper. It's also called a handbag zipper. This one right here is the number 5, and as I said at the beginning of the video, the width of the zipper tape is the same on both zippers. It's 1.25 inches across, so 1¼ inches across the width. Your zipper does need to be 1¼ inches in width to be able to do this method. You don't want to be using a number 3 zipper, which is only 1 inch wide. The only difference between this 4.5 zipper and this number 5 zipper is the width of the teeth. The teeth on this zipper are more narrow than the teeth on this one here. If you do want to use the 4.5 and you're using a continuous zipper tape, then you'll just go ahead and put your zipper pull on here, then cut this to a length of about 20 inches. You'd put on your binding and then it would get cut to size once the binding is on. Now to put the binding onto the zipper tape, I do like to use a little bit of double-sided stick tape. This one is only 1/8 inch wide, and you can keep it out of the stitching line if you're worried about this gumming up your needle. We want this binding to fit within the two zipper stops, so the one here where the zipper pull is and the one at the bottom of the zipper. So when I apply the tape, I'm only going to apply a line of tape within those two stops. You want to burnish it down a little bit, and then you'll put a piece of tape on the other side as well. This will help hold that binding in place as you're sewing it down. Now if you want to just clip it in place, that's fine too. You do whatever you're comfortable with. You always have to remember that there's no right and wrong in sewing. You do what works for you and what's comfortable for you. Okay, now I'm just going to release the tape from one side. We'll leave the one on the bottom in place for now. Now you want to open this up and you want your zipper to fit right into the crease there. It needs to be nice and snugly in there. So the edge of the zipper tape is butting right up to that crease. And once you have that in place, you can go ahead and release the tape on the other side, I should say the paper on the other side, to expose that adhesive. And then you'll set the other side of the binding onto the back side of the zipper. You do want to make sure that that fold is sitting snugly against the edge of the zipper tape, because if it's not, the zipper tab will not fit on properly. I'll be sewing with a stitch length of 3.0. I am going to start with the zipper slightly open, and you do want to back stitch. Stay 1/8 of an inch away from that edge there. Now we'll close the zipper up and sew over to the end. I have one side of the binding sewn into place. Make sure that you caught the fold on the opposite side of the zipper. Now you can go ahead and install your second binding, but when you do, make sure that these edges are even. So you want the binding to be even on both sides, on both the top and the bottom. And I'm going to go ahead and sew mine on off camera. You'll do this exactly the same way that you did the other side. After you have the binding on both sides, you want to cut straight across the zipper where that zipper stop is, so that you're cutting it off. And the two ends of your binding should be even with each other here. Then on this end, you're going to pull your zipper pull down below the binding. And again, you're going to cut straight across. Now your zipper should be approximately 17 inches long altogether. You want to go ahead and secure the end of the zipper here so that the pull doesn't come off accidentally. You can either do that with your sewing machine or you can do it with some hand stitching. And you want to do that at this end and also at this end. You want to secure these ends together here. I have both ends of my zipper now secured with some stitching. I did do that on the sewing machine. And I just want to say a quick word about sewing over zipper teeth. You never, never, never want to sew over metal zipper teeth. If you're worried about your machine's ability to sew over any zipper teeth, whether they're nylon, plastic, metal, whatever, what you can do is just hand walk your needle over the zipper teeth, which means you're just manually turning your hand wheel towards you to get your needle to ride over the zipper teeth. So be very careful when you are sewing over zipper teeth with your sewing machine. Now our next step will be to take the zipper tabs, and we're going to place them right sides together, one on each side of the zipper here. I'm just going to secure it with a couple of wonder clips, and then I'll take another one and I'll place it on the opposite side. Make sure that all the edges are even at the top and on the sides. It's very important for this step here, for all of these edges to be even with each other. And then you want to do the same thing on this side. You'll just place the two zipper tabs right at the end, making sure that all of the edges are even. I am sewing the zipper tabs on with a 1/4 inch seam and a stitch length of 3.0. And you do want to back stitch at both ends. After you have the tabs sewn into place, you want to go ahead and pull the tabs away from the zipper. Get all your edges to be even and then hold it together with a few clips. Now we're going to top stitch all around the tab, and we will top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. And I'm still going to use a stitch length of 3.0. And then you can pivot. When you get down to where the curve is, you'll take one stitch and pivot a little bit, and you'll just do one stitch at a time until you get around the curve. When you get to the next curve, you'll do the same thing. And by taking one stitch at a time, it's going to give you a nice smooth stitch line. And when you get back up to the top, you'll pivot and just sew back across the top again. And then you'll backstitch just a little bit. And that's what your tab should look like, all finished. After the zipper tabs are sewn on, you want to find the center of each tab and punch a hole to get ready for your cam snaps. Now, I'm not going to go over how I put in the cam snaps, but I do have a video that I will link to that shows you how to install them. And I do like to put the female side on the zipper tab. And it's easier to put the cam snaps on the zipper before you actually install the zipper onto the pouch. Now we're ready to sew the zipper onto the pouch. So we need to find some centers. You want to find the center of the zipper. You'll measure from one end of the tab to the other, and then you'll divide by 2 to find your center. And I have my center right here, which I've marked with my chalk marker. Then you'll do the same thing with your pouch. Measure from side to side, get that measurement, divide by 2, and find your center. And my center is right where the stitch line is on both sides. Now, just like before, I'm going to use some double-sided stick tape to help hold the zipper into place as I sew it. Your other option is to use some fabric glue. If you prefer to just clip it in place, that's fine too. As I said before, you just do what you're comfortable with. So I'm just going to put some of this double-sided stick tape along the top edge here. And again, this is just 1/8 of an inch wide. You burnish it down, and then you'll remove that release paper on there. So I'm removing that paper, and then I'm going to open up my zipper. Now I want my center mark to be in line with the center mark on the pouch, and I want the top edge of that binding to be even with the top of the pouch. So I'm going to flip it over now so that I can line it up correctly. And once I have it right where I want it, I can stick it onto that tape. And you'll do this across the top. And then for some extra insurance, I do like to put in a few clips just to hold it all. Now we can go ahead and sew one side of the zipper to the pouch. This side is still free. I like to secure just one side at a time. We're going to sew with a stitch length of 3.0. You want to start right past the binding. Now we will follow this line of stitching along the top here. This is the line of stitching that we created when we put the binding onto the zipper. You do want to back stitch, which I've already done, and then you're going to follow that line of stitching all the way across the top. You want to make sure that the pouch or the zipper underneath is not caught anywhere under the needle as you're sewing along. Then stop right when you get to where the binding is. And then we're going to stitch down to the other fold. And then you'll pivot and you'll sew 1/8 of an inch away from this folded edge right here. And again, stop right before the binding and then sew up to that top line of stitching, pivot, and then secure everything with a few more stitches. We finished sewing this side on, and now we're ready to sew the opposite side on. So again, you want to put the double-sided stick tape or glue, whichever you prefer to do, and then we're going to line up these center marks again. And we also want to make sure that the top edge of this binding is even with the top edge of the pouch. And then go ahead and secure it down. And then once again, I like to put in some clips just for some extra insurance. I'm sewing the zipper to the other side of the pouch, and you're going to do this exactly the same way that you did before. You do want to make sure that the opposite side of the pouch is not getting caught underneath the needle. The zipper is completely installed now, and the only thing left to do is install the opposite side of the cam snap into the side of the pouch. Now, if you've measured everything the way I have here, then the placement of that snap should be 3 inches down from that faux binding. So you'll just take your ruler, measure 3 inches down, and then I just took a marker and I placed a mark right into the center of that side panel right there. And you're going to see that it's going to land right on your stitching if you've stitched yours exactly the way I've stitched mine. This is where your fray check will come in handy. You want to put a good amount of fray check on both sides of the punch or the hole that you put into the side here to install your cam snap. And that is going to prevent any of that stitching from coming out. So I'm going to go ahead and install mine off camera. My cam snaps are now completely installed. And the only other thing that I did is I took the pouch over to the iron and I folded back on that stitch line. This is the stitch line that we marked 1 inch from the top, and then I just fold back on it and I give it a little shot of steam on both sides. And then I do the same thing with the bottom. I just pull the bottom straight and give it a little shot of steam, and that helps it to square off nicely and sit very nicely on top of a counter. Well, I really do hope that you've enjoyed this video, and I hope that you'll give the project a try. It truly is always a joy for me to put these little projects together for you. I want to give a sincere thank you to everyone who has supported me by watching and liking my videos and subscribing to my channel. If you're not already a subscriber, I would love to have you as one. And I'd also love to have you as a member of my Facebook group, which is called Rosie and David Patterns.